I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Hey everyone, it's Anthony. This episode is a special Creators on the Couch episode that we had previously recorded with Meghan Fitzmartin in October of 2022, and it has been a Patreon exclusive up until now. Since I'm going on vacation this week, and due to work and life unfortunately getting in the way, I haven't had a chance to finish editing the Voyant episode, so the release order is going to be shuffled a bit. Next week is going to be Claire, then Penguin, then Shazam. So just disregard whatever other stuff you hear in the episode regarding future content because it's all out of date by now. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this awesome discussion with Meghan Fitzmartin, writer of the Robin Tim Drake series, and we will see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is another Creators on the Couch episode, and we are very lucky to have with us the fantastic Meghan Fitzmartin. Thank you so much, Meghan, for taking the time to speak with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
So we kind of reached out to Meghan through her website. I believe it was through the website or through Twitter. I don't remember which one. I think it was the website.
I believe it's the website, yes.
Yes. Well, I saw you on Twitter. That's what it was. I had seen you very active on Twitter and everything. And I said, oh, I want to get her on the show. And so I reached out to her and utilized the contact form on the website. So word to the podcasters, go out there, chase those folks down, shoot your shot. As Doc is a big Hamilton fan. He's very fond of throwing in references, and we never throw away our shots here on this show.
Love that.
So Meghan is the first creator that we've had on the show who is also a podcaster. And so before we get into some of the comics discussion about that, I just want to have a little bit of a discussion about that. I know that you, on your website, it says that you primarily worked in scripted audio dramas. Was that sort of how that all came about?
Kind of. So I do both scripted audio dramas, as well as I have done a podcast for a number of years called Wine and Comics with a buddy of mine, where we drink wine and talk about comics. Super standard, basic sort of a thing. We haven't been able to do it since the pandemic, mostly just because he's busy. His workflow is crazy, and he's got a small child, so became a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I actually got into writing for TV because I wanted to write audio, and my writing for TV is what led me to write for animation, which led me to write for comics. So my love and affection for audio drama is sort of what inspired this whole thing. I grew up listening to audio drama, which is very rare for an American to say, but I come from an incredibly conservative religious background, and there are two good things I think that have come out of Christian media, and one was an audio drama that I listened to growing up. And so it was incredibly impactful and really good storytelling. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to try and pursue this, and ended up pivoting a little bit, but been able to write my own stuff and write on some other people's stuff. So it's been very fun.
Wow, that's fascinating, because I love radio, and I think that's why podcasts appeal so much to both of us. But that's the first time I've heard someone even mention audio dramas. I only got introduced to them through podcasts. Well, wait, I take that back, because I remember in my college days, I'm not going to go into the legality of this, but got my hands on some MP3s of like the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, because I was always a Sherlock Holmes fan. And I realized, years ago when they used to do radio like that, I always wondered, how can that be translated into moving forward? So that's an amazing backstory.
Yeah, you don't hear too many folks, that were not not around in the 30s and 40s say, oh, I love listening to radio dramas and things of that nature. And, my love for The Shadow is well scripted and well documented on our show. And obviously one of the big things is The Shadow really started off as an audio drama. And I was a communication studies major in college. And one of the things I did was audio engineering and radio TV and things of that nature. And so working with sound effects and Foley, all those things continue to appeal to me even now. And it's a shame we really don't get to do too much of that on our show. We have a little bit of with the skit. I get to throw in some sound effects, but we don't get to really embrace the full scope of audio drama and people standing at the microphone and just kind of.
Now you've done it. Now you've done it, because when I write those things, there are plenty of times where I think of sound effects and things. I just didn't want you to have to edit so much.
Well,
but now
we said it. Now you've got go for it.
And damn it! Now I shot myself in the foot.
Yep.
All right.
I mean, it's great though, because it is still a continued media source over in Britain. Britain never really got rid of it in the way that America sort of moved quickly past it. So there's a lot of really good stuff that is continued to be out there. Like the show that like I said, really got into started in the 80s, but I have a lot of friends in Britain who started on listening to Hitchhiker's Guide, was a really big one and really pervasive and really part of the culture. Doctor Who. There's a lot more that's like outside of American culture that still does a lot of audio drama, which is really, really fun and really amazing.
Yeah, I have original cassettes of the Empire Strikes Back radio adaptation starring John Lithgow as the voice of Yoda.
Oh, that's so cool.
I have never listened to them because I don't have a cassette deck anymore.
Oh, okay, sure.
But I bought them, I'm talking like 15 years ago. I found them at like a flea market for like $2.50. I was like, well, this is just, I'm taking this. Thank you very much. It's still in the box and everything with the cassette. So I still have it next to my VHS of the special edition Star Wars trilogy, next to my DVDs of the Star Wars trilogy, next to my DVDs of the original unedited, unspecialized, whatever, next to my Blu-rays of the Star Wars. Yeah, I have a bit of a problem. But we're here to talk about my obsessive need to collect Star Wars memorabilia. We're here to talk about you. So you kind of beat me to the questioning punch a little bit, was in the sense that TV and animation work, you said that would kind of spun out a podcast. I saw on your website you had written for Supernatural. So did that come from the audio dramas?
No, so the audio drama is what got me into writing in general. So I went to school to be a youth pastor. I took a bit of a detour, but I went to school to be a youth pastor. And while I was there, I took a class because I really wanted to write audio drama. And I did that because I was so impressed upon how story was really impactful for me growing up. I read a lot of comics. I listened to audio dramas. I watched animation and TV. When we finally got a TV, I was super sheltered. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this says writing for radio and television. I want to learn how to do that, because when I go off and be a youth pastor, I think that this could be a really influential way that I could like tell stories for kids and things like that, because like I said, stories were so important to me. So I started this class. It did not teach radio at all and only taught television, but I learned that I was like, oh, I love writing for TV too, so I'll stick with it. And then ended up loving it so much that I got an accidental minor in communications at my very small Bible college, and was like, I think this is what I want to do. I think ultimately the whole reason I went to school to be a youth pastor is because I wanted to tell kids that they are loved. That was super important to me. It's still very important to me. And so I sort of had a come to Jesus, if you will, that what I wanted to do could be best done through stories rather than what I was originally planning to do. So out of audio drama, I learned how to write television. Then I moved to LA, where I worked towards writing for television. I got a job on Supernatural after a number of other jobs, and was an assistant, wrote an episode, met some people in animation, got staffed on Supernatural, did some animation stuff, then found my way into comics through the animation.
Yeah, because I had seen again on your website that you wrote for not Supergirl, but what's the name of the show? It's all the
DC
female characters?
Superhero Girls?
Superhero Girls, thank you.
I did a couple of the short episodes of DC Superhero Girls, which was really fun. I was able to write Damien actually into DC Superhero Girls, which was very fun for me.
Oh my goodness. And that means that my daughter's been exposed to it. That's amazing.
Damien is a very interesting character, and I particularly like how he's written in the Harley Quinn animated series, which is very, very different
Oh,
than
yeah.
Superhero Girls.
Yes.
But yeah, he's a very cool character. So then I guess that's how you hooked up with the folks over at DC, and then you kind of worked your way into writing for comics.
Sort of. So I had done some DC animation stuff. I also did a movie. I co-wrote it with Jeremy Adams, who's currently writing the Flash comics. But we wrote this movie called Justice Society World War II. And around that time, Dan Didio was still sort of leading DC and reached out to a bunch of folks in Warner Animation, basically saying, hey, does anybody want to write comics, because we want more people. So my folks at DC Animation reached out to me and Jeremy and some other folks, and were like, do you want to do this? And Jeremy and I both were like, yes, 1,000, yeah, 100,000%. And yeah, went over to DC and met with a bunch of the editors there, and got on like gangbusters.
Awesome. So was the first work that you did the urban legends, or was there something prior to that?
So the first work that I did for DC, I actually did a 2-issue story called Future State, Robin Eternal, which is where I first wrote for Tim. It's set in a potential future of Gotham where things have gone a little off the deep end, and Robin sort of has to do a heist with, spoiler, and a new character, Darcy, that is now in my Tim Drake Robin run, because I loved Darcy so much, so I brought her back.
I picked up that run. I have not read the Future State. I didn't read everything Future State. I caught bits and pieces of it. So
there was a lot of it. So yeah,
there was a lot of it.
There was plenty.
Yeah.
We talked to Philip Kennedy Johnson last year, and we were talking to him about some of the Future State stuff. And it was literally right before he started writing Superman. It was like within the next couple of weeks that was being released. Like I think Future State had maybe just come out, and then his formal run on Action and Superman, like the 2-parter, the back and forth that he was doing there. And I've been meaning to follow up, and I did follow up with Philip. So if you're listening, we'd love to have you back on the show, because I want to talk to you about Warworld.
Yeah.
Need to talk to you about Warworld. Just, throwing that out there.
It was amazing. I love Philip Kennedy Johnson. He's great. I finally got to meet him at New York Comic Con. We've been Twitter friends for a while, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. It was so great to meet him.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I live in Jersey. I went to New York Comic Con for, I don't know, 10 straight years or close to that, but I haven't been able to go the past couple of years because of the pandemic and kids and so on. But in any case, okay, so you wrote the Future State, and then is that what led to you writing the stories within the Urban Legends anthology?
Yeah, so I wrote Future State. Paul Kaminsky was my editor. He's now the group editor for Superman. Great. Love Paul with every fiber of my being. He's amazing. And then I was also working with Dave Wilges at the time, and Dave was sort of spearheading a lot on Batman Urban Legends, and reached out to me and was like, hey, would you like to do a story for Tim Drake? Dave loves Tim Drake. I love Tim Drake. And we were like, he was like, I would really love for you to like continue working with him. I was like, yes, 1,000%. I love Tim, would love to continue telling stories for Tim. So Dave was like, okay, well, just think about what you want to do, what stories you want to tell, and then get back to me. And the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, well, it's a story about identity. And thus it became a story about identity.
Yeah. So obviously that was one of the big questions I was going to ask, is in that Urban Legends 3-parter, that's where Tim discovers, I guess internally, he said, that he's been struggling with something, and he's been feeling off, and he doesn't really want to talk to Stephanie, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. And that's when he reconnects with Bernard, an old classmate of his. And this is when he finally realizes that he is bisexual. Is he bisexual or canonically gay? I've never quite determined that.
So part of the reason that we've not said specifically, put a label on it, is because I wanted to honor so many journeys of so many people who are still trying to figure out, is it bi? Is it pan? The specific thing is that his relationship and attraction to Stephanie is real, as is his relationship and attraction to Bernard. So those two things are true. And as the journey of Tim Drake continues on, potentially we will find a label for that. But it was very important to me and everybody at DC really to not just immediately go in and be like, ah, yes, I know, because that is not always true for some folks. So while that is definitely true for some people, many people it is not. So wanting to be respectful and give Tim the space that he needs to figure it out for himself.
Yeah, that's a very mature way to handle it, and I have to say that just that entire arc allows for someone, especially as a creator, as a writer, for you to demonstrate an understanding of the human condition that many people don't even get to think about on a regular basis. So that's actually a pretty heavy weight to carry. I have to say, was this a situation where everyone was on board? Because even just let's say a decade, 2 decades ago, we're not having this conversation, you know?
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for saying that. That's very kind of you. I came to the story going, okay, this is the story that I want to tell. I went immediately to Dave and said, "Hey Dave, you've got to tell me right off the bat if we can do this or not, because this is it for me. Like this is the story that makes sense." I very much am an organic storyteller person in the fact that I come from a character-based story, so I focus on character and I focus on like, not to get like woo woo about it, but like, what do you want? You as a character, what do you want to say? And like trying to give the character as much space as possible to speak what it is that I feel is imperative to their narrative, to their story. So that to me was a huge part of it. And I was like, I think that it has to be this. I went back and read so many of my comics that like beginning of Tim Drake run and so many of the other like really great Young Justice stuff. And I was like, okay, this feels right. Like it feels right. And I need to know whether or not I can tell this story, because I don't know otherwise. I'll have to think of something else. And Dave was great and was like, this is not the first time this has come up. Let me run it up the flagpole. Let me talk to some folks and I will get back to you. And I was like, okay. So I was waiting with bated breath. And I remember getting the email because I had emailed him this question and he emailed me back and was like, I ran it up the flagpole. We got the green light. You're good to go. And ever since then, everyone, and it wasn't that like anybody was ever not supportive, but everyone has continued to be encouraging and supportive and 1,000% on board. And yeah, I mean, that wouldn't have happened a number of years ago, but the current team at DC is amazing and incredibly supportive and incredibly like willing to tell those stories and willing to dive deep into aspects of character and aspects of nitty gritty that haven't really been explored in ever. So it's been great.
Or at least not in the high profile manner in which we've seen
Yeah.
a lot of non-hetero relationships, just to put the sort of penumbra over it, whether it's Tim and then John Kent, over in the Superman, and then a lot of stuff with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
That pairing has been utilized a lot more frequently, and you can sort of bring it back to earlier characters like Renee Montoya and things of that nature that very much paved the way for these kinds of stories to be told. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely. And I mean, more so to the point too, I think there's been a lot of really good work in the independent space, like Image and Boom and things like that. There's been a lot of work within this particular medium. I was talking to Ram, who's been doing the detective comics, and he was saying something about how comics are punk rock. And he just said that over and over again, comics are punk rock. And I remember that. And I remember thinking like, yeah, no, exactly. Like it is punk rock to be so vitally and brilliantly yourself. And we haven't really had the chance to do that in a while. We, like I said, Image has been doing it and Boom has been doing it, but like being able to do it over at DC, both with John and Tim and Harley, and starting off with Kate Kane and Renee, like it is a punk rock movement, and it's a radical like being of self, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and to see the big two, DC and Marvel as well. Marvel has been embracing that a lot over there as well. It is really refreshing to see that the heteronormativity that has existed in comics for decades is finally starting to move away, and we're getting out from under the oppression post, I don't want to put it all on seduction of the innocent and Wortham and all that
There's a
stuff,
lot
but
of that though.
there is a fair amount of that. Yeah, that
Yeah.
puritanical mindset and things of that nature. But it is fantastic to see that these kinds of stories are being told. And I mean, Doc and I are both cis hetero dudes, but we love reading these kinds of stories. I'm speaking for Doc, but we've had these conversations offline. It's just, if it's a good story, I'm all about it. And I know it's cliche to go, I don't care what their color is, I don't care who they love, but it's the truth. If it's a good story and they're compelling characters, I'm in.
Absolutely. And I think what I really enjoyed is the space so whenever I was working on Supernatural, there was a lot of moments that I'm really grateful for that sort of prepared me to work on DC comic stuff. In particular, it's the internal investigation of my own sort of personal biases and things like that. And that has been something that I've been really wanting to actively work through, of like, even within comics, okay, if this makes you uncomfortable, that's totally fair because our feelings are valid. But like, why are you uncomfortable about this? What is I remember having a conversation with somebody about like, a good story is a good story, and being able to investigate like, but why do I think this is a good story? We did this a lot, like I said, with Supernatural. I noticed sometimes that certain writers would get more accolades than writers of color or writers who are women. And it was really interesting because our fan base was mostly women, not everybody, but like a good majority were women. And asking that question of like, oh, I wonder why that pattern is existing and why that has emerged. And people like what they like. There's absolutely that aspect of it. But also, this was a story that was told about like two white cis brothers who were often written by white cis men. And so their stories are told a certain way. So whenever you come in contact with somebody who's telling the story in a different way from a different perspective, there is a bump sometimes. And that's okay. Once again, like, that is okay to recognize it. But what is not okay is just to say, well, I guess this is not nothing. What's better, I have found, is to investigate and dig in and go, oh, okay, well, why did I have this bump? And that happened to me all the time, and investigating it within myself. And that has been the hope of writing anything, is that there is space for investigation.
Yeah, the supernatural fandom is known for shipping and slash, and I've read a lot of things tangentially. My wife watched the show a lot, and Castiel and
Mhm.
involved in a lot of those pairings and things of that nature. They're very vocal and very
Yeah.
opinionated and passionate people.
I mean, same with DC. Like, I never begrudged it because I was like, no, thank God. Thank God that you care so much. That is what we all want, right? Is that like, to make something in which you create this level of passion and excitement for something. And I always found it really interesting, but I also had the benefit of being able to take a step back and be like, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I learn? How can I tell stories better and reach people in a way that like connects with them in a way that is supportive and helpful. And so I think it prepared me for DC, the passion and love that the DC fandom has. And I have also been parts of those types of fandoms of like, I've always been a big Marvel fan. My family, I come from football fans. Like, there's always passion. Religion could also be argued as being a big fandom of something. Like, that passion exists. So it's a study of like, how do you passion supportively?
Very well said. Very interesting. And I guess I never considered it from the perspective of the writer, because we've never had somebody work in kind of all of those fields, and at least been willing to speak about some of those things. But not to get off on too much of a tangent, but I'm just curious to question a little bit more. Than you say, when you were working on Supernatural and you had that very vocal fandom, I know that there are some fans, and I'm willing to say that they are, a very small minority, who disregard the canonical stories, whatever, to create their own headcanon, so to speak.
Mhm.
How difficult is it as a writer in that type of situation where you have authoritative control, for lack of a better term, over these characters, to then get feedback from the fandom community and say, we know that's the story that you're telling, but that's not the story that we want? And how do you, or if at all, is it possible to synergize some of that so that it flows a little more cohesively? I'm
Mhm.
failing at words, but I think you understand the point I'm trying to
No,
get at, is how
totally.
do you juggle and balance the desires of the fandom versus your desire and needs as the creator and as a storyteller?
Essentially, what you're asking is fan service. At what point do you acknowledge fan service or shy away from fan service?
And how
And
do you balance it?
yeah, absolutely. And that's a very fair question. I think we always said at Supernatural that we didn't write for Twitter. I'm sure you guys also understand. Like, there's a difference between people who are watching any show. It wasn't even just Supernatural. There's a difference between people who are watching it live. You go on that hashtag and you'll see people's reactions versus people's reactions the next day or the next week and how like they're sort of processing it versus people who have like binged the show and are now watching week to week after having binged the like 13 14 seasons of the show. There's a lot of different reactions going on, and there's a lot of different, I think it's a similar thing with comics, that like there's a difference if you grew up only reading graphic novels and you've gotten into like, oh, you know what, I'm now able to drive myself to the comic book store and I've never been able to do that before, whatever that is. I go to the comic book store now and I get issue to issue. That no longer feels canon. That like feels like there's some sort of elasticity to storytelling that's happening. And so there's a different reaction that I think readers will have versus when you were, when I have a graphic novel that is from like 2006 or whatever, that is canon. That is canon with a capital C, and like no one can argue with it whether or not you like it. That is what happened. And I think it is an area where we just we don't talk about it a lot. We don't have a lot of study within it, for lack of a better term. And so for me, I tend to try and write, like I said, authentic character. I look at the character, I look at what the character is coming from. I think fan spaces are important. It is very important for me to recognize and be able to build in a sense of boundary of like, I need to know the criticisms, I need to know the joys so that I'm not like mired in my own sense of imposter syndrome or everything is horrible. But also at the end of the day, I have been in fandom spaces and I know how weird it is when people who create come in and are like, cool, like what's going on, fellow kids? And it's like, no, 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 this isn't for you. Fan fiction is great for this. It's like I'm a huge supporter of fan fiction to exist because it becomes this space for community to exist that I, as a creator or writer, do not really have to be a part of and shouldn't, to be perfectly honest. That is not necessarily my place.
You know, there is a real world analog to this, and we do it all the time. We are constantly shaping the people that we meet or that we interact with, whether it's through work, whether it's through events or whatever. My
Mm,
job, seeing patients, like I'm seeing them for a very brief period of time in a hospital. And that's the moment where I'm noticing everything they're doing, what they're saying, and all that.
yeah.
And I have to come to judgments. But nurses are with them 24/7. And
Mm,
so sometimes people say, like, well, what's better? And my point is, they're not better or worse,
yeah.
they're different.
Yeah.
And to draw the parallel, when you are working on a character, when you're writing for that character, you are making considerations for a lot of things that people may not
Yeah.
recognize or acknowledge in that process, as opposed to the finished product where someone else is filling in those background blanks for themselves.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
that creates an opportunity for like way different opinions, but also I think it allows for the fact that if you've created a character that people are willing to fill in those gaps, then you've created a person.
Yeah.
That's something that's really impressive. I
Yeah.
want both. I want the idea that, as you said, like longitudinally, if I binge on something, I'm like, oh, wow, I could really see how this all went down and how it develops, as opposed to someone just picking it up like for the very first time saying like, wow, why is that person doing that? Oh, I don't know, I don't think I would do that. It's
Yeah.
like, well, that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And to take the time to want to go back and find out about that person, it's no
Yeah.
different than in my job when I'm doing a history on someone. I'm like, I'm not trying to put my judgment on you. I'm trying to have you tell your story to me.
Yeah.
And if you're able to do that in a way that I understand, then we're going to have a good time with this. And the fact that you are able to take things, be they, I know we were just talking about it, whether it was controversial or not, or things like that. And then with your own background, I got to give you credit where you mentioned having a conservative background. Some of the topics that are brought up, like, wow, that can create a lot of emotional tension. So, the fact that those things all get synergized, and to be honest with you, because I did read a lot of these comics, I'll be honest, in a very short period of time. So I
I'm
did.
so sorry.
No, it's great. It's great. That's actually how I usually do it. So the fact that you brought that
Okay.
up, that's wonderful. So I got to see that. But my point is, I didn't get any of that. I didn't get this idea like,
Mhm.
wow, this writer's really struggling to find this person's voice or whatever. I didn't get that at all. I got
Yeah.
a person, and it got me more excited to talk to you about this because of
Yeah.
how clearly organic and fleshed out it is.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we've had conversations with other folks in our patrons and in our fan community and things like that, even just, within the podcast talking about comics and this need to, especially as a story is unfolding issue by issue, for people to say, oh, they're not writing this character correctly, or they're
Yeah.
immediately jumping to conclusions about the end result. Like it's a 6-part story and you're
Yeah.
jumping to conclusions about something that's happening in issue 1. And they're saying, oh, well, this shouldn't be happening, or da 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 da, or X, Y, and Z should be going this way, or this character should be doing this. Like, let the story unfold. And then at the end of it, if you want to make judgments on the end result and say, well, I think that, when they started off here, or maybe they could have gotten to this end result a different way, then I think it's, from my perspective, it's a healthier response
Yeah.
than this need to go issue to issue. But unfortunately, the way that social media and things of that nature, and the way that our media consumption is set up, you need those hot takes, you need that instantaneous reaction video.
Yeah.
A trailer is out, it's on YouTube 90 seconds, and there's already 17 channels that have a reaction video up with just a person frame in picture, whatever, talking over the top of a trailer just so they can be the one to get the hits and the
Yeah.
clicks and things of that nature. It's destructive to an extent in storytelling. And I think it's definitely, something that we can have a meta conversation about.
Yeah.
That's not a joke on metahumans or the metaverse. It's just, the overarching discussion about, the impact of social media. But that is for an entirely separate podcast, an entirely
Really.
different set of circumstances. So let's bring it back to Tim then. So you write the Batman Urban Legends. Was there always this discussion when you were writing that story that he would be spun off into his solo series and that you would continue to take over, or how
No,
did that come out?
that was sort of a hope and a dream and a wish. DC has been very supportive of Tim, but like I don't have access to all of the numbers or anything. So like I don't know what necessarily is beneficial. Warner Brothers, I don't know if you know, has been going through some stuff in the business department.
I've heard some stories, just
Some things.
bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah. So I never know, like, I know that there's always an intention, and I knew that like with Tim that there was a hope and an intention, and trying to figure out if like this is viable. But I think it was April that I finally got the call that was like, okay, we're going to be able to do a Tim Drake story. So it was building up to that, and I know that that's something that Dave Wilgus really wanted to do with Batman Urban Legends anyway, was to be like, here are some opportunities to like see what works and what doesn't, and like bring in new writers who may potentially have some really cool stories that we can spin off into others. There have been some really great, like Azrael has been really lovely, and I've really enjoyed Azrael, and that's from stories within the Batman Urban Legends books. And that was sort of a like, okay, we're gonna like believe that it's gonna happen. And then in April I got the call, and we've been going on ahead.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I do always enjoy those anthology series because I like the notion of getting to tell some of those smaller scale stories
Yeah.
interspersed together, because it does give you nice possible jumping off points. And for the company, for whether it's DC or Marvel, it does obviously give them an opportunity to sort of throw a whole bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks and what really connects with the fans. And if you're telling 4 or 5 different stories within this anthology series, and 2 of them really get a lot of traction amongst readers, then you go, okay, now these are the 2 that we want to tell, and maybe we can hold on to some of those for later and see what comes of that. So continuing the story, beyond just the urban legends and the Pride special into the full solo series, there, at least in the first issue, there are a host of very interesting side characters that live in the marina
Yeah.
and in that area of Gotham. And I just wanted to get some input and feedback into what was some of the thought processes in creating the cast of characters for Tim and Bernard to interact with outside of the Bat family.
So there's a couple of things with this. One, I have always loved Found Family. One of my favorite comics that I grew up on was Fantastic Four, partly because of dynamics. I'm a massive dynamics fan. Like, I love seeing how people react to each other and what different relationships mean to each other. We're not going to get a lot of interaction with some of the other Marina folks within the first arc, I don't believe, but we'll see some of them. I think Pi makes a couple appearances, but yeah, the other side of it, I sometimes live on a marina. I have lived on a marina, and so this is spun out of life when I was thinking of like really cool places for Tim to live. It is wild to me that we have never explored the Gotham Marina. It makes sense that there would be. We've existed in warehouses, we've existed on the docks. We know that it is surrounded by water. It's with places like that, you have a marina. You have a place where like the sort of outcasts of society end up in this marina. And like, not that Tim is an outcast, but he's sort of making himself his own outcast. And you're like, good for you, bud. And so whenever I was talking with my editor, Ariana, of like places that Tim could live, a marina popped up. And I was like, this makes the most sense. Like, it not only is a place that I can write from out of like with knowledge, but it's also an interesting space that we've never really looked at before. And one of the things that I've been wanting to do with Tim is tell those smaller stories, like, because I grew up on comics that I've always loved that were much more locally based rather than sort of the cosmic scale. That was what was really interesting to me about Tim Drake and this particular story. Like I said, I Fantastic Four, but also the like Mark Waid run on Daredevil was also really impactful to me. I made a comment about the Avengers worry about the world, the Spider-Man worries about Queens, and Matt Murdock worries about 5 blocks. That's it. And like manages expectations. And I've always loved that. And I'm like, that to me feels a little bit like Tim. Is he's like, I gotta worry about this area. Like, I'm gonna manage expectation. If they need me somewhere else, I'll go somewhere else. But like, he's such a logically minded person that I'm just sort of like, yeah, he would find a home and be like, this is my home base, and I'm worried about this space, and then build him up from the ground up in that particular way.
Yeah, you're definitely singing my song about the Fantastic Four. We just did Sue Storm a couple weeks ago on the show, covering her, and we've done Ben previously. We did Ultimate Read, so we've done episodes on a couple of the Fantastic Four. And
when you do regular read, because I can't do Ultimates, I've never been angrier at Ultimates in my life than by Ultimates Fantastic Four. But when you do Reed Richards, he is my heart and soul, and I have some strong opinions about our dear Mr. Fantastic. So bring me back to that particular episode.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Boy,
Well,
howdy.
we will definitely reach out to you. He's on our master list. We'll get around to read one of these days. And we do talk about a lot of his dynamic and his marriage with Sue within her episode.
Of course.
You have to. I mean,
Oh,
Yeah.
just,
I mean, yeah.
it's not even a thing where, oh, we're going to do disservice to the female character by talking about her husband. It's one of the longest lasting relationships in comics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you sort of have to like Sue,
it colors so much of her by just nature of the relationship. It impacts who she is. And we talk about the stuff with, Johnny versus Reed, and, how that impact is she put in the middle there.
But not even put in the middle. One of my favorite dynamics is Reed and Johnny, and like how if they were on the street, like crossing streets from each other and had never met, they would never connect, and it's only Sue. Like, it's such an interesting dynamic. And those, to bring it back to Tim, like, those are the types of dynamics that I love. In the first issue, I have Darcy and I have Bernard and I have Detective Williams, essentially making my own Fantastic Four, if you will. But the dynamics that, like, all of those folks bring, and even the dynamics that the other Robins bring to Tim. Tim is fascinating to me because of the dynamics that he exists in, because of how different he is from his family, and how that relates to what he does, even though it's similar but different. Like, it is great to me, and it's wild that he hasn't had a solo series in so long, because I'm like, this is such a rich character. You can dig for centuries and not even scratch the surface.
You know, it's amazing because I have the show notes like on the side here, and I'll admit Anthony puts them together, but you are hitting so many points before we actually say them. That is amazing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
because we did an episode on Tim, but it
Right.
was released, I want to say, in like late 2020.
Mhm.
So clearly a lot has changed for Tim in that time span. But we did talk about how Tim is a very distinct Robin. He is the most cerebral one.
Yeah.
And the question was really, how do you maintain that clarity of character while not separating him from the rest of the Bat family, but focusing on this subgroup where it's less on a focus on him working with Bruce and Dick and Damian and Stephanie and Barbara, et cetera, and focusing on this group while still maintaining that very clearly defined characterization. And I mean, you kind of answered like 90% of it before I even got a chance to ask the question. So
Great, fantastic. Good job, me. I also think he represents so much of, I said this at New York Comic Con, he represents the burnout generation of millennials. He represents this in-between phase. What I love so much about Robins is each Robin sort of is a representative of the group, the generation that they came in with. And so Tim came in as a millennial and like is sort of experiencing a lot of it. And one of the things that I find, once again, really interesting within storytelling is that tension between, I love my family, I am part of the Bat family, but also I need to like make my way out into the world. I need to know, like, what is that piece that's next up for me? And even though like some of us millennials are no longer in college and far past the post-college experience because of the way that the world has been through the 2008 crash and the pandemic and all of these different sort of things that have spiraled and evolved into this experience is what's so great about being able to write for Tim. It's being able to have a meta narrative about the current existence, but in comics. That's what comics are for. That's what genre is for, is to have a meta narrative discussion.
yeah, and I really enjoyed in the Urban Legends story arc where he was basically struggling with the fact that he couldn't just brute logic his way through this.
Yeah.
He's fighting and he's trying to think about this and he's analyzing it and he's like, why can't I figure this out?
Yeah.
And I think it was it Stephanie or one of the characters who basically said, you kind of focus on everything else because if you have to turn internally, you're not going to like what you find.
Yeah. Barbara.
It was Barbara. Thank you. Yeah, I knew somebody. It was one of the characters, but it was this, it really hit home to me because it was very much a situation where I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on everybody else's problems because if I do that, then I don't have to worry about mine.
Yes.
And at some point, the chickens have to come home to roost and you have to do the hard work and you have to sit down, internalize it and figure out what is going on, not in a what's wrong with me, but just what is going on. And you have to sit with those feelings and live with them and accept them. And that's, something that therapy taught me. And it's something that frankly, just doing this show has taught me over the past 4.5 years is how to sit with these feelings and acknowledge that feelings are not good or bad. They are. And it's what you do with them that can be judged accordingly. But, and that's something that I try to teach my kids, but I have to do it myself first. I have to model that before I can teach it. Yeah. And so a lot, to get back to the comic, a lot of what I was reading with Tim very much was hitting home with that. And, you speak about the burnout generation and the burnout millennials. Doc and I graduated high school in 99. So we're very much of that cohort.
Yeah.
We know a thing or two about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That has been the joy of working. Like I said, the joy of working with Tim is to process my own stuff and process what I'm seeing and process the stuff that I think a lot of people are processing. Like, to your point, it is a real frustration, and being able to come at it from a perspective of there is no right and wrong. There is just story. Story doesn't have to be right or wrong. Story can be a process and a processing. What I've been trying to do with Tim to express that, like, once again, to not give specific answers all the time, to be able to say, okay, so we open this door for this discussion and conversation. And I find there are other people that find that not as interesting. There are other people for sure that like do not enjoy that storytelling as much. But for me, that is the kind of stuff that I've always loved to read. So, because it's when we're telling story, I think be it because we get paid or because it is the day-to-day that we do, we tell stories because we want to be seen, because we want to be heard. And it isn't about good or bad. I am telling a story because I want someone to see me.
Wow.
Boy, oh boy. I'll admit with this show, sometimes we get deep, but I think that's a great summary.
Yeah, that is a fantastic summary. And frankly, I don't really know where else we can go with that other than to say the only other question I would have then is how far ahead have you planned out this series?
Well, that's a great question. I feel like it's interesting because I think one of the things that I love so much about comics is that you have such a quick turnaround and things move so much quicker than like animation, which I wrote 2 movies last year that I won't see for 4 years. Like it just sort of happens, and whenever it comes around, it's like, oh right, I forgot I wrote this thing. It's like Christmas. And with comics, it sort of goes by much quicker. I write this thing. I just finished speaking of Warworld, I just finished a 8-page for a Wildstorm anniversary edition where I am writing an 8-page story for Apollo and Midnighter. That's coming out in November. I finished it a couple weeks ago. It is a very quick turnaround. And so because of that, things change so much depending on what DC needs, depending on what different aspects of Gotham may need, depending on what different aspects of stories that I need within Tim Drake. It is difficult to plan ahead. That is the longest way of saying that I have some potential stuff, but also it's very dependent on how the book sells. As far as I know, the first issue sold pretty well, but it's the second issue that is the real test. So fingers
Always
crossed.
is.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll know, I think, a little bit more. I have plans aplenty for where to take Tim. I would love to continue to write this character for many, many years, but also it's very dependent on if people buy the book. So buy the book.
Well, you got my issue 1 and you got the money for me for issue 1, and I will be adding this to the poll list. So for what that's worth,
Take it.
you'll take it, and you can pass that along to your bosses up there at DC and Warner Brothers. Not like they have, any other things on their plate to worry about.
They're not busy. They're fine.
No, they're just kind of sitting around twiddling their thumbs right now.
Yeah. Bored. Absolutely bored.
Yeah.
So Megan, we're gonna wrap this up. Where can folks find you on the internet, and what other stuff do you have aside from Tim Drake? Do you have anything else in the pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am at Meg Fitz, MEGFITZ 89 across the platforms. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all of those. It is at Meg Fitz 89 because it is a thing that I came up with when I was 8, and you just sort of stick with it, I guess. And then you can also find me, to your point, I have a website, MeghanFitzmartin.com. And yeah, stuff that's coming up is more Tim Drake, the ending of Dark Crisis Young Justice, and the next one for the issue 5 comes out on Wednesday of, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but it's coming out this month in October, so it's very soon, and that finishes in November. I've got quite a few things coming out in November: a story in the Wildstorm anniversary comic, story in the Dark Crisis where our Batman and Zatanna. I wrote a Zatanna short for that, which I'm really excited about. Tim Drake, of course. And then I wrote a story for the Stanley book that DC did that's coming out in December on what would be his 100th birthday that I'm really proud of and I'm really excited about. So that's in December. So yeah, some good stuff coming that I'm really, really stoked about.
Excellent. Well, we are looking forward to all of that. I'm definitely interested in the Apollo Midnighter story because they've been a joy to read in the War
Yeah.
story. And I'm very much looking forward to getting a hold of that. And then obviously the rest of Tim Drake Robin, we will encourage everybody to go out and check it out and add it to your list. And then if you can find the urban legends, go back and pick those back issues up so you get a little better understanding and basis of that, as well as the Pride special. So you at least have some semblance of a basis for where Tim was and how he got to where he is now, specifically with respect to Bernard and everything else. And then, looking forward to seeing what else you've got moving forward.
Yeah.
So Meghan Fitzmartin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. We definitely appreciate it. And we're looking forward to the rest of what you've got. And if we ever do get around to doing that Reed Ridges episode, we will absolutely give you a call.
Bless you. Thank you guys so much. I had a blast.
So you can find all of our episodes on our website, capesonthecouch.com. You can go back and check out our episode on Tim Drake. As I said, it was from a couple years ago. So we may be due for an update then on Tim, and we may see what Tim has been up to in the past couple of years. We are Capes on the Couch on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com if you want to send us some thoughts. This episode is, at least for right now, Patreon exclusive, but we will be releasing it to the main feed at some point in the not too distant future, but we'll see as far as the timing goes. But if you're listening to this right off the bat, you obviously know you are a very valued member of our Patreon organization and our fan support, and we do love and appreciate you there. And if you're listening to this on the main feed, you can get early access to stuff like this. If you go to patreon.com/capesonthecouch, you can subscribe. $1, $3, or $5 a month get you early access, exclusive materials, uncensored stuff, and a whole slew of other stuff. Doc, anything else you want to add before we head out?
It's fascinating. I usually don't do this because my mind works like a brain dump. If I write something or if I do something like this podcast, I basically forget about it almost instantly. When I look back at the Tim Drake piece, I think Burnout, it fits very well with what we wrote. So,
absolutely. It absolutely does. Meghan Fitzmartin, again, thank you very much for joining us for Doc Issues. I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.